Today's story comes from a man in Ohio who waited nearly 11 years to open a safe his wife made him promise never to touch. He finally opened it at 67 years old, and inside was something that changed the way he understood his marriage and his wife. Her name was Eleanor. They had been married 42 years, raised 2 daughters together, lived in the same house outside Dayton most of their adult lives. Nothing extravagant, just a steady life built slowly over time. Morning coffee together before work, Sunday grocery trips, old arguments about the thermostat, the kind of marriage people rarely notice anymore because it looks too ordinary from the outside. Then Eleanor got sick. At first it was small things. She started sleeping more, eating less, forgetting appointments. Then came the scans, then the diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The man who sent this story said he barely remembers the drive home from the hospital. The only detail stuck in his mind was the doctor's tie, blue with little white dots. Funny what the brain holds on to when everything changes. Eleanor was quiet most of the drive. Then finally she looked out the passenger window and said, "I thought we had more time than this." He didn't know how to answer her. Over the next few months their lives became smaller. Doctor visits, medication schedules, long afternoons at home, but in some ways they also became closer. Simple routines started feeling important. Watching television together at night, sitting on the porch without talking much, making coffee in the morning while she read the paper at the kitchen table. A few weeks before she died, Eleanor had a safe delivered to the house. Small black steel safe, heavy enough that the delivery driver carried it in with a dolly. He asked her what it was for. She said just putting a few things away. The answer felt strange coming from her. Eleanor wasn't secretive by nature, but he didn't push. A few nights later she handed him a small key and said, "Promise me you won't open the safe after I'm gone." He smiled a little, thinking she was joking. What's in there? Things that belong in the past. That sounds mysterious. She looked at him for a second before saying quietly, "Just promise me." So he did. 3 weeks later, Eleanor died in hospice care. He said the hardest part wasn't the moment she passed. It was coming home afterward. The house still looked exactly the same. Her sweater over the chair, reading glasses near the sink, a grocery list still attached to the refrigerator with a magnet. For a while he left everything untouched. The first year after her death moved strangely. Their daughters visited often at first, but eventually life pulled them back home. One lived in Seattle, the other remarried and moved to Arizona. Phone calls became less frequent over time, not out of neglect, just life moving forward. He retired at 62 and settled into a quiet routine. Coffee in the mornings, television in the evenings, trips to the grocery store just to get out of the house. The safe stayed in the hallway closet the entire time. Sometimes he'd open the closet door and look at it for a few seconds before shutting it again. He knew the code. She never hid it from him. That somehow made the promise harder to break. Then around Thanksgiving during his 67th year, his younger daughter brought up selling the house someday. She said it gently, "You shouldn't stay here alone forever, Dad." He understood what she meant. But after she went to bed that night, he sat alone in the living room for a long time, thinking about how quickly a life disappears once people are gone. One day strangers would live in that house. They'd repaint the walls, replace the cabinets, throw old things away. The life he and Eleanor built together would slowly become invisible. Around 2 in the morning, he walked to the hallway closet. He stood there for a while before finally kneeling in front of the safe. He said he actually apologized out loud before entering the code. Inside were 4 things: a stack of envelopes, a velvet jewelry box, an old cassette tape, and a photograph he had never seen before. The photograph stopped him cold. It showed a young Eleanor standing beside a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old. On the back, written in Eleanor's handwriting, were 4 words: "Our Michael, summer 1971. He said his stomach dropped immediately, because they never had a son, only daughters. He opened the first envelope with shaking hands. The letter was addressed to him. It began, "If you're reading this, then I suppose loneliness finally outweighed the promise you made me." He had to put the letter down for a minute after reading that. In the pages that followed, Eleanor explained that before she met him, she had been engaged to another man, a mechanic drafted into Vietnam. She became pregnant shortly before he deployed overseas. A few months later, he was killed. At 20 years old, frightened and completely alone, Eleanor gave birth to a baby boy she wasn't prepared to raise. Her family pressured her into a closed adoption. Back then, people handled things differently. They kept painful parts of their lives quiet and moved on as best they could. A year later, she met the man who would become her husband. The man telling this story, she never told him about the child, not because she didn't love him, because she buried that part of herself so deeply she no longer knew how to bring it into the open. Then came the part that stunned him most. Nearly 20 years earlier, Eleanor had quietly found Michael. She followed his life from a distance, learned he became a teacher, saw photographs of his family, knew he had children of his own, but she never contacted him, not until she got sick. Inside the safe was a cassette tape from the meeting they finally had after her diagnosis. He said it took him almost an hour to gather the courage to play it. When Eleanor's voice came through the speakers, it felt strange hearing her again after all those years, older, softer, nervous. On the recording, she apologized to the son she had spent decades thinking about. Michael listened quietly for a long time before speaking. Then he asked the question he had apparently carried most of his life. "Did you ever want me?" There was a long silence after that. Then Eleanor started crying. "You were never unwanted," she told him. "Not for one day." The man who shared this story said that moment stayed with him more than anything else, not because of the secret itself, because he suddenly understood how much sorrow Eleanor had carried through their entire marriage without ever letting it harden her. Then he opened the final envelope. Inside was Michael's address, and one sentence from Eleanor: "I think you'd like each other." For several weeks he kept the address in his wallet without doing anything. Part of him felt like contacting Michael would somehow be crossing into a part of Eleanor's life that didn't belong to him. But eventually he wrote him a letter. Simple, respectful, no drama. 2 weeks later, Michael called. Their first conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. After that came more calls. Then eventually an invitation to dinner. The man who sent this story said the strangest part was how familiar Michael felt almost immediately. Same quiet sense of humor as Eleanor. Same pauses between sentences when emotions got close to the surface. At dinner, Michael showed him old photographs Eleanor had mailed after reconnecting with him near the end of her life. Pictures he had never seen before. A younger version of his wife. Not different, just younger, carrying things he never knew about. And sitting there with Michael's family, he realized something he hadn't expected. Eleanor spent decades afraid this truth would damage the life they built together, but it didn't. If anything, it made him understand her more completely. There was only one part, he said, still troubles him. During Eleanor's final months, she gave him opportunities to ask deeper questions, small openings in conversation, moments where she seemed close to telling him more. Each time he let the moment pass, not because he didn't care. He simply thought there would be another chance later. That was the part he regretted most. Not the secret, the missed conversations, the assumptions, the habit people develop in long marriages of believing there will always be more time to say difficult things. The man ended his letter by saying he still talks to Eleanor some mornings while making coffee, still catches himself looking toward her chair in the kitchen, still misses her. But now when he thinks about the safe, he doesn't think about betrayal. He thinks about a frightened young woman who carried part of her life alone for a very long time. And he thinks about how easy it is to reach old age without fully knowing the people we love most. Sometimes not because they wanted to deceive us, but because life taught them to survive by staying quiet. If this story means anything, maybe it's simply this: don't assume there will always be more time for the conversations that matter. Sometimes there won't be. Sometimes there won't be.